At a time when women were expected to remain silent, she raised her voice powerfully without seeking the spotlight and defying patriarchal norms, cultural, social, and political barriers. Her voice echoed truths long before the world was ready to listen, spoken not for applause, but from deep conviction and anchored in purpose. Phoebe Muga Asiyo, a woman of many fasts, helped shape a just, equitable, and inclusive Kenya. Her relentless efforts contributed to paving the way for women's participation in Kenya's social, economic, and political spheres. Phoebe Asiyo's journey began from the corners of Kenya's colonial reserves by the shores of Lake Victoria in Kendu Bay, Karachuonyo, culminating on the global stage, standing as a force, bold, unwavering, and transformative. In 1952, at just 20 years old, Phoebe Asiyo became a probation officer and social worker assigned to the Africa Colonial Reserves. At the time, the British colonial government had declared a state of emergency in order to effect a crackdown on the Mau Mau uprising. Phoebe witnessed firsthand the ruthless measures against the Mau Mau and offered dignity, hope, and a comforting presence to the displaced and wounded.
When the emergency was declared and arrest of our people by the British started, I got involved, especially in collecting children whose parents had been whisked away to detention camps. It was rough, it was cruel, it was unbelievable.
In 1958, she became the first African president of Maendeleo ya Wanawake, redefining its purpose into a force that addressed the real needs of African women.
We participated in changing the agenda because it was very narrow at that time. We brought in ideas like for economic empowerment of women. Even at that time, agriculture was key because women were the farmers and they needed to have information about better methods of farming and so on.
Under her leadership, the organization championed maternal health, economic empowerment, and women's political participation. In 1960, Phoebe Asiyo led a historical delegation of women to Lodwar alongside nominated MP Priscilla Abwao and other women leaders from across Kenya. The purpose was to urge Jomo Kenyatta to guarantee women full political representation, boldly proposing that half of all parliamentary seats go to women after independence was achieved. Even though they were unsuccessful, they remained undeterred, such that when Sir Patrick Renison nominated Priscilla Abwao to be part of the Lancaster House Constitutional Talks delegation, they prepared her to champion women's rights. Sadly, Priscilla Abwao was not allowed to speak at the talks, only to give her written submissions.
And then we started talking politics. Jomo Kenyatta was in detention, and at that time many men were going to see him in detention and discussing the future of our nation with him, and no women went. But we tried and were able to send one woman to Lancaster House, Priscilla Abwao, who was nominated member of parliament. We raised some money, but also got some help from men like Mboya, and we sent Priscilla Abwao to represent us at the Lancaster House. And she came back with a lot of good information about the discussions at Lancaster House. And we began to feel like we were getting there, because now in Britain, there was a woman's voice. And we gave Priscilla a lot of information on what, although there were KADU, there were only two political parties. There was KADU and KANU. I was in KANU, and there were others. Priscilla was in KADU. But it was the women, the issues of women that concerned us most. So we converged at that stage, KADU and KANU, and drafted an agenda for Lancaster House meetings.
In 1963, Phoebe Asiyo broke yet another barrier when she became the first African woman to serve as Senior Superintendent of Prisons. She was instrumental in separating male and female prisoners, ensuring incarcerated women were treated with dignity and had access to healthcare and sanitary products and rehabilitation over punishment, and called for the abolition of the death penalty.
I think it is because of my experience in Maendeleo Wanawake that I applied for that position in the prisons. There was this one case that really changed me completely. There was this woman who had been tried to hang, and while we were preparing her to go to committee and be hanged, we asked her son to come and see her, which a privilege given to those who have been here. And while she was talking with the son, she said, you know, I'm dying in your place, so take care of my home and take care of the children. And then when the son left, I asked her, why did you tell him that you're dying in his place? And he just like, imekwisha mama, sikitu. I said, no, I want to know. And I really insisted. We even prayed with her. She still refused to tell me. Eventually she broke down and told me he killed his father, but he's the only son. So I'm dying in his place. That is why I really worked so hard for the abolition of the death sentence, because you can never know.
On the eve of independence, Phoebe led another delegation to Gatundu, seeking inclusion in Jomo Kenyatta's new government. Kenyatta laughed, asking if there were enough qualified women to take up the positions. But Phoebe held her ground, presenting her case with clarity and conviction. The conversation around women's inclusion and participation in government had begun.
There was no hygiene. The conditions for the African people, especially for women and children, was really bad at the time. And he knew, and he made a promise that his government will take care of our concerns. We asked him for 50-50 representation in parliament and local authorities. And he looked at us and said, fine, but do you have women who are well educated as men to occupy these positions? So when he came out, he tried. He set up the Commission of Marriage and Divorce, and also the inheritance, because the laws then were pretty bad for the African women here. They made very good recommendations. Those commissions, unfortunately, Parliament refused to accept our recommendations.
In 1979, Honorable Phoebe Asiyo was elected to Parliament alongside Grace Onyango, who had been elected in 1969, Dr. Julia Ojambo, Grace Ogot, Nyiva Mwendwa, and Chelagat Mutai, making her among the first few elected women parliamentarians. Having unseated Honorable David Okiki Amayo, a powerful KANU figure, her win was challenged and nullified. Phoebe came back stronger, having won the ensuing by-election with an even greater margin, cementing her position as an elected leader. She went on to serve as Member of Parliament for Karachuonyo for 2 non-consecutive terms. In 1985, Phoebe helped shape the Nairobi forward-looking strategies. A decade later, she stood with a 500-strong Kenyan delegation in Beijing, influencing the Beijing Platform for Action at the landmark 1995 United Nations Conference on Women. Honorable Phoebe Asiyo's influence extended beyond Kenya's borders, having served as the United Nations Development Fund for Women (UNIFEM) Goodwill Ambassador from 1988 to 1992. 1997, while still serving as Member of Parliament, Honorable Phoebe Asiyo tabled Kenya's first affirmative action motion, calling for at least 1/3 representation of women in Parliament.
In 1997, I moved the first affirmative action motion in the House, and it was rejected, defeated very badly. But some of the men who talked for it were really very concrete. And those who were against it were bad. Like they said, oh, well, you want women to grow horns, you want women to divorce their husbands and things. These things that don't even exist in our society.
Until 2010, when you looked at the percentages of women, in fact until 2013, when you looked at the percentage of women parliamentarians, the percentage of women parliamentarians has never exceeded 10% in this country. And so that was a very clear illustration of the exclusion of women from decision making. And so Honorable Phoebe Asiyo brought this motion to Parliament to commit the Kenyan Parliament to ensuring that at least 1/3 of the members of Parliament were women. So unfortunately the motion failed. But something very positive happened despite that failure, which was the recognition by women that we needed to organize across party lines, and we needed women from different sectors to work together in order to ensure that we got our civil and political rights recognized. And so women began to openly, assertively, deliberately seek civil and political rights in this country, and the Kenya Women's Political Caucus was actually born out of that failure. I have the privilege of having been in Parliament that day, and so after the motion had failed, we went to one of the lounges, and the women agreed that we were going to put together the Women's Political Caucus, which was now going to demand and press for the 1/3 principle.
Her male colleagues laughed her to scorn and mocked the proposal, but history would prove her right, for her motion planted the seed for what later became the not more than 2/3 gender principle enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya 2010, requiring that in any elective or appointive body, there can be no more than 2/3 of one gender.
So the women, through the Kenya Women's Political Caucus, decided that we had to demand that the constitutional reform process itself has to respect the principle of gender equality. And so we then drafted like something that was basically a 10-point agenda. Professor Wanjiku Kabira was instrumental in this, so was Honorable Phoebe Asiyo, and so was Martha Karua. And I actually am the one who drafted our demands, our 10 demands.
Phoebe, together with fellow women's rights advocates, founded the Kenya Women's Political Caucus, later known as the Caucus for Women's Leadership, that demanded for women representation in the political arena and mentored a generation of women leaders. She held the position of chairperson until her passing, reminding the nation that women's issues are political issues. In 2001, Phoebe Asiyo was appointed as a commissioner in the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, CKRC. Drawing on decades of experience in public service and women's advocacy, she became a key voice in shaping the inclusion of gender equity and human rights in the new constitutional framework. Her work helped move gender equality from a marginal concern to a constitutional imperative, and shaped legal and policy reforms that uplifted all women and marginalized communities. In 2009, Phoebe Asiyo made history when she was named the first female Luo elder, a groundbreaking honor that shattered centuries of cultural norms in Kenya. Asiyo's lifelong leadership, political advocacy, and service to Kenya had transcended those barriers. As Phoebe Asiyo stood boldly in public life, challenging systems, championing for gender equity, and shaping policies for inclusion, her foundation was rooted in the strength of family. She was the devoted wife to the late Richard Asiyo for over 65 years. She was a beloved mother, a doting grandmother, and great-grandmother. Her family were an inspiration and dependable support throughout her remarkable life journey. Phoebe Asiyo's journey has been one of dedicated service and unshakable purpose. She remains a towering figure in Kenya's story and history, a true legend and a testimony to Kenyan women's legacy of strength.